Hello everyone, welcome back to MLS Moves. Please make sure you like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The U.S. men's national team still has a coaching vacancy, and it will be interesting to see what they do with that position after a disastrous Copa America performance. We are currently left with more questions than answers, so I brought on Max Bretos to discuss the state of the U.S. men's national team and where he thinks they go from here. Max, welcome back, man. How's it going?
Feels good. Where did you go? It's been too much time.
It has been. It has been. It's been a long time. Well, I brought you back on today to talk about the national team. It's obviously was a not ideal summer for the U.S. men's national team. A lot of fans were upset, disgruntled, including myself, after a lackluster performance at Copa America in 2024. What's your just quickly? What is your overall thoughts on what you saw this summer with the national team?
Yeah, very disappointed. And we can't get used to disappointment because we've had, obviously the big one was 2017, not qualifying for the World Cup. We all said, okay, this is rock bottom. And we won't see a day like this again. And we won't miss another World Cup. Certainly hosting it helps. The expansion helps. So I don't think that day will come, but, never say never. But that's the wake-up call that you want. And after that, making the World Cup, it was I getting through that first cycle with Greg Berhalter. I think we had to look at, say, the growth. We can't be we can't be delusional about what are the expectations, and getting the World Cup and making it to the knockouts to me was a good spot to make it. So the growth was in the right spot, and with the end of that World Cup cycle, Greg Berhalter coming back, based on that, I said, okay, that'll work. But then this Copa America performance is another big drop. It's not 2017, but it's something you don't want to see when you're growing in that direction. This was, unacceptable. The historical significance of it, where every host has made it out and you are the first one not to. It massively disappointing, especially when that the opportunity was afforded to Panama, and that Canada takes advantage of it and is playing in a semifinals. It just can't happen. So I think we have to really rule with an iron fist. That was, without question, had to be the end of Greg Berhalter, and it's a huge malaise with regards to that, because I know, Greg Berhalter, we all know, has his critics, and he has to take his share for the burden. But to me, what happened in the Copa America, the golden generation of players, which were just complete on that roster, everyone that we'd seen build up in Europe was on that team, and they fell flat collectively, and they got to share some of that burden too. So it's just opened up a Pandora's box about where we are, coaching wise, player wise, and that anyone who thought that we were accelerated in some of those areas, we have to pump the brakes. There's a lot of work to do when we see this. There's a lot of work that we were hoping had been done already, and clearly it hasn't. So here we are.
Yeah, and also too, Max, I think regardless of who they hire, they're going to see some type of new coach bump. When LAFC moved off from Bob Bradley in 2021, they had a disappointing season. Cherundolo took over, had a very similar roster, not too crazy different. They made a lot of additions that summer, one of the best summer transfer windows we'd seen. But you could just see how much better the team was playing when they hear a new voice. Sometimes, even if the coach is really good, a voice can become stagnant. They need a new message, need a new leader. Nothing to say that's bad about the coach. Well, in this point, I do think Greg had a lot to, of the blame. But as far as the coaching search, is there any specific candidate you would like to see get this job?
I don't know if there's anyone specific. I mean, in a dream world, to see what Marcelo Gallardo did with River Plate and developing players, which I think is a key part in what these coaches could do. Although that said, they're going to spend such little time with these players. So there's a player development, at least having the eye to see who is developing by watching all this tape. Say let's say it's Griffin Yao, who's having a nice Olympics, and you're seeing, without him under your watch, how he is developing with his club and what he's doing with his career. You need to have a really sharp eye with regards to that player development. So that's why I like a guy like Marcelo Gallardo, because I trust in, he sees a young player, he affords that player some opportunities, and then you get Julian Alvarez, or you get Enzo Fernandez. You get these players that take huge steps. So that kind of coach I would like. The alternative to Greg Berhalter, is it someone who comes in and really causes a frenzy and lights a fire into these players? But the problem with that is I don't know how our players will react to that. We're very different, and maybe they're a little cushy, and someone pushes them a bit and they push back. I don't know. I would tend to think you would like a different profile in that sense.
What if they decide to go the MLS route though? Is there if they end up, which from what I've heard behind the scenes, they seem pretty gung ho on going the MLS route again. Is there a specific, if that's the way they're going, who would you hire from the MLS pool as the next manager?
Well, before I answer that, you have to kind of take the cue of the countries that are successful. I think that's the smart way to do it. So when people say, let's get Jurgen Klopp, and no big nation is hiring Jurgen Klopp. Who are the high profile managers out there, and how have they fared? I think Didier Deschamps would classify. He was a big star player, but didn't have a huge pedigree, but he won with France. Roberto Martinez is another one who went with Portugal. I don't think he's done enough to suggest that plan, getting the high profile, spending a lot of money on these guys, works. This is a hard decision. I don't want any part of it, but there's a lot of pressure on U.S. soccer to get it right. But what has worked? Lionel Scaloni, who was a good player in his day, no real pedigree as a manager, has come in and done marvels with Argentina. But when he was hired, I'm sure people are like, who is this guy? Nestor Lorenzo at Colombia. He was coaching in Peru. I'm curious. I would like for U.S. soccer to have the eye. Let's say they hired Nestor Lorenzo. What would the reaction be here? People are like, who the heck is that? But there's coaches out there. Tedesco at Belgium, guys that you don't really know about. Nagelsmann in Germany, that was a big hire. So I get that in some other areas. The Spanish coach whose name escapes me, where did he come from? This was not a sexy hire. But there's some truth in finding guys who have been involved with the national team, under 17s, under 20s, that I think is a good model to follow, because there's not the sexy manager out there. But to get to your question, eventually the U.S. national team, I think, will always look towards their coaches, which is good news. Do we have the best coaches? No. We do have two very good candidates in the league, in my estimation. I think Wilfried Zaha has proven he is, and these are guys that are good as a club coach. Could they be good as a national team coach? As we all know, it's a different skill set that is may not be exactly what a Wilfried Zaha or the other candidate, Steve Cherundolo, really want to do. But I think for both those guys, coaching the United States in a World Cup cycle here would be an opportunity that would be hard to turn down, knowing you could land on your feet. But I think those two guys are good candidates. Are they perfect candidates? We don't know. I don't know. It's this idea of people said throw the house at Jurgen Klopp. What if Jurgen Klopp, this isn't his bag? Maybe he is a club coach. It's just national team coach is a weird predicament. But I think when U.S. soccer, if they don't get some guy, look, I think Patrick Vieira was the front runner. I don't know if he still is, but that's a guy who has not really blown you away with his resume. But I think that's the kind of coach that you could get there. And I think people have to get used to the fact that the name that's going to be, whether it's an MLS coach or not, isn't going to be a household name by any means.
Well, and that's another thing too. I've seen some people say this job isn't that desirable, but I think this job is very desirable, because you're talking about the most talent we've had, at least on paper. They need to win some things before we can really crown them as the best generation we've ever seen for the national team. But you have all this talent, Max. You have the World Cup being hosted on American soil, so that's going to obviously give you the spotlight, being the national team manager, the hosting country. So that obviously would be appealing for a manager who might look at the national team as a 2-year job and then try to get something bigger after the World Cup ends. I just think that we can't get this hire wrong. We have to make sure that we, like you said earlier, you wouldn't want to be the one deciding who we hire, but this has to be. We have to get out of the group stage. If we get grouped again, 2 tournaments in a row, that would be catastrophic for the national team. And 2017, the famous video with you and Taylor Twellman, what are we doing? This would be honestly, Max, worse because we qualified for the World Cup because we were hosting. It's not like we, didn't qualify. So this would honestly be the lowest point, I think, in national team history if we got grouped. So we have to make the right hire. I think we need to make a safe hire. We don't have to go too crazy and do something way out of left field. I think that Wilfried Zaha would be a home run hire. You look at what he's
I'd love
done.
it. I'd love it.
I want a coach who's done more with less, Max. Getting Montreal. Now, I don't know how many people who are national team fans pay attention to the league or teams like Montreal, but finishing second place in the Eastern Conference with the roster and limited spending they have is a feat in itself. And that's the type of manager I want. You look at what he had with Columbus, or when they goes to a team that does spend more than Montreal does, at least. He wins the MLS Cup his first year. And that's the kind of manager I would like to see the national team. Or maybe someone with a little more experience, like a Willie Sagnol from Georgia, or Hervé Renard he's coaching the women's national team in France. Maybe someone with that pedigree. But there are plenty of options that I think are realistic. I don't think we have to sell ourselves short and think, oh, we can't hire anybody. I think there are plenty of good options that we could hire.
I like all your options there. They're all good. I know Steve Cherundolo's not on that list for you.
He's not, but I've heard that he's the favorite. That's what I heard last night, that he was the favorite again to be the manager. So that'll be interesting to see. The thing with Steve is, it's why I said a second ago about doing more with less. Steve had this fortunate opportunity to coach the best team in the league. And I'm not saying that means he's a bad coach. I'm just saying we don't really know how he would do on a team that might be less talented. And that is too risky for me. I just don't think we've seen enough on what he can. I would, if he wins a couple more MLS Cups with LAFC, then you could say, okay, this guy definitely deserves a chance to coach in the national team. Maybe after the 2026 cycle, you look at Steve. I just think in this moment right now, I don't think he is necessarily ready to take a job like this.
I think hiring Steve Cherundolo I would imagine in 2 years' time, he would remove the doubts. I'm being very close to him and say that he could be the guy. But to your point, I think he would want to be if he got the job now, maybe he's saying in a perfect world, I would get this job in 2027. But that the opportunity comes now, you certainly take it. Wilfried Zaha's been at it a little bit longer. I think you look at him, he is a gift. He is a gift, this coach that comes to this league, gets results, plays a certain style, has players that run through a wall. He turns a player that's playing MLS Next Pro into a top-tier prospect that European clubs are interested in. He just has an incredible vision. I would say that Steve's not too far off. He just doesn't have the experience. I think if you look at what he has done first of all, I mean, there's a perception about the American coach, and I get it, because American coaches have been put in charge of this program through the years, and American coaches are not French, Argentine, or Italians. If a coach from one of those countries comes in, you're hit with a warm comfort because you figure there's a pipeline, and there probably is. We have seen Argentine coaches knock it out of the park in particular recently, German coaches too. But there is that perception, which is a bit of a knock. But I would suggest that Steve is a German coach. He spent 2 decades there, and he learned there, and he has contacts there. I think seeing what and again, I would put Nazi top of my pecking order. But Steve, seeing what he has done in developing young players from Europe to becoming really good in the form of Timothy Tillman and Mateusz Bogusz, having a good eye for that and maintaining a good standard there, having players, having a style of play where he has transitioned this team to being a counterattacking team, but with also those instincts that they can possess and get after it. It's pretty intricate and avant-garde what he has done in a short amount of time. Being someone covering MLS, I haven't really seen it. The knock on Steve is that he loses finals, but I think you also have to look, he gets finals. So while he wouldn't be the top, if he got appointed later, I for one, I'd be disappointed he left LAFC, but I would do some convincing to people to suggest that he is a guy that makes sense. The reason he got the LAFC job is because, and I don't know what if what the interview process for the U.S. coaching job is. He is a guy that could share his vision, and people would be like, "Wow, this guy's amazing. This is what we're looking for." So I think I would be happy because of the guy. Whether it's going to be a success, I don't know. But I think it's important to have someone too that has a real good idea of the player base. I mean, if it's someone who's coming from a clean slate, maybe that's not the worst thing either. But if it was Steve Cherundolo or Wilfried Zaha, I think that is something that could be a positive. But again, you have to throw a big net, and I imagine they are, because this process is taking forever. And they aren't dummies there. Maybe they're limited in some ways, but they're not sitting on their hands looking at it. They're doing an exhaustive search. But as your point, it is a huge decision, huge decision, and you have to make, in their mind, the right call. And maybe that is playing it to a more comfortable level with a coach that you figure could enter that ecosystem relatively seamlessly.
Well, hopefully they don't take 7 or 8 months again like they did the last time. Hopefully it's a little bit more of a speedy process than that. Yeah, when you talk about like Patrick Vieira, for example, we obviously are both familiar with not just his playing days, but his coaching days in MLS. And Max, that's the most successful stint he had as a manager. It was in MLS, so it's City Football Group in New York City FC. He was a manager there for 2.5 years, and that was the most successful stint he had. And if you want to compare his resume to Wilfried Zaha's, for example, it's not even close. What Wilfried Zaha did in MLS, and you could even argue, well, I don't even think you could argue, it is a better league right now than it was when Vieira was here 7-8 years ago. So he's doing more. He's got more results in a better league with more teams. And obviously, Vieira, failed at several stints in Europe. It's his player profile is the only reason he's even consideration for this job, because of what he was as a player. But if you took that away, he was just a Joe Schmo, just with his coaching career versus Wilfried Zaha's coaching career. This wouldn't even be a discussion.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Wilfried Zaha, which tells me he knocks it out of the park in an interview process or what he does, is the fact that how he got the Columbus job. I mean, he was at Montreal, and Tim Bezpachenko interviewed him that he would go above and beyond, having to make a trade to get him to come over to Columbus, which is really unheard of in MLS, and to make that kind of leap. But they felt comfortable enough, and Columbus is the gold standard when it comes to this league. They do everything right from top to bottom. It's an amazing club. It's because they have that great leadership. And they said, we got to have this guy at all costs. This is the guy. And they were 100% right. So it's what I've never seen anything like it. Just the way he approached that CONCACAF Champions Cup tournament, going into these places where MLS teams hadn't won and making it look easy. So it's, with the exception of Pachuca, but still, this was going to shape up to be another miserable tournament for MLS, and he changed that narrative. He is a pretty special guy, and he's got a coaching tree, and that's growing all the time. We're seeing it develop before our eyes. This is a coach that's going to, hopefully he can stay here or stay involved with American soccer, because this isn't his home, but hopefully we can make it that in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I personally, like I said, I would like to go more of the international experience route, just because of going the safe pick that has, done this before. But if they have to go the MLS route, Wilfried Zaha is definitely my pick. Now, the final question I have for you, Max, with the national team is and this is obviously 2 years away, but what do you think are the realistic expectations for success in this tournament? Because obviously, we talked about this in our last episode. MLS and the U.S. men's national team are tied at the hip, especially for 2026 because of us hosting it. What would be considered successful for the national team in 2026?
Well, we have the fortunate reality that we're going to be in this World Cup that's an expanded 48 teams. So how far we go has been, I guess, compromised because we're going to have to play an extra game, which is going to be true. When I think about it, it gets me very nervous because the U.S. will have a favorable group and we'll get through their group. It would be imagined. But then you're going to enter a 32-team tournament, if I'm not mistaken. And so, we'd always say a quarterfinal. The standard is, whether you want to agree with it or not, to the audience, is making the knockouts. The reason we can say that is because we've made it past there once. Until we do that with some regularity, we can't realistically say the standard is we've got to make a quarterfinal, which I think would be the next step. And I think the realistic ending point for us. The good news about making a quarterfinal, if you make it to a quarterfinal, you're in the mix. Good 90 minutes, you could get a good bounce of the ball, but you've got to find a way to make it that far. I think obviously with what happened this summer, a quarterfinal in 2026, we're doing backflips. I don't think the U.S. is, the conversation about us winning a World Cup. I don't want to have that because right now I don't think we're going to win a World Cup. Not in my lifetime, a lot older than some of the folks listening, but I just don't see it. There's a lot of things in place that need to be improved, but hopefully we can show some signs where we can reopen that conversation. It's kind of weird that we had it because people talk to me. I say, we're not going to win a World Cup. They kind of draw back. And I just don't want to have that conversation because there's not evidence that we are going to do it. It's for select few countries. And, the Euros re-emphasize that. There were some surprises, and then look who's there at the end. The Copa America was supposed to be open. Look who was there at the end. The last World Cup, we have Morocco and this and that. It's France and Argentina in the final. It's very hard if you haven't made it, if you're not in that inner group to make these things. So I think we got to be realistic. I think a quarterfinal is a very fair ceiling for this team. If they make it further, great. We have work to do, but the tricky part, if it was a standard World Cup, a 32-team World Cup, hosting it and making the quarterfinal, maybe your expectation goes a little bit further, but you have to win like 2 group stage games, round of 32, round of 16. So what, 4 or 5 games? That's a lot. I mean, we're asking we'll see. The luck of the draw, there's so much at stake. But let's set it at a quarterfinal. I think that's fair.
If the U.S. men's national team makes it to the quarterfinal with the new format, meaning they would have to win their group and 2 other games, that would be remarkable, and that would help everybody. That would be a rising tide lifting all boats for soccer in this country. So hopefully that happens. We'll see who the coaching hire is. That's going to determine a lot. And yeah, I mean, listen, I'm going to be very interested to see what happens. It's going to be a very interesting 2 years for soccer in this country. Hopefully a lot better than 2024 for the national team, for our sake, right? So we can see as much growth as possible. But Max, I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for coming on and talking some national team news and coaching search with me. I can't wait to have you back on. Hopefully, maybe even after they hire a coach to get your feedback on it.
Done. Keep up the great work, Will. You've got a great channel. Appreciate the service that you provide for everyone out there. Good stuff.
Thank you so much, Max. I appreciate it. And until next time, guys, we'll see you all soon.